everybody. It is 8 p.m. in Amsterdam, 11 a.m. in San Diego. Welcome to the Montessori show, our sequence in San Diego. And I have Simone Davies here with us from the Montessori Notebook. Hello, Simone. How are you?
Hi, Jeanne-Marie. I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Excited to be sharing some kind of basics, but we're going to go in depth about what is Montessori and answer. We have some questions that have come in, answer some questions about Montessori in general and theory and how we can apply it at home with ease.
Yeah, cool. And also people can ask questions during the live call as well in the chat room, but you have to not be on an iPad or your telephone. You have to be actually on a desktop or a laptop to access the chat room, and then you can drop questions in there too, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can.
Yes, and welcome everybody. We have Estefania from Venezuela, and I just want to say a special welcome to her because she is leading a Montessori Facebook group in Venezuela, trying to introduce Montessori to her country, and I want to support her in her efforts. So it's wonderful. I'm sorry that we can't do it in Spanish, but hopefully this will be helpful to everybody worldwide. So there, and we have Pamela that is back, and somebody, Zoe from the UK, and Joelle joining us from France. So wonderful. So Simone, if you're ready, I have a few questions that we can start, but I think you had, we were going to start more with an introduction and kind of speaking to those who might not know what is Montessori. If you could maybe give us a little bit of background into what is this thing we call Montessori?
Yeah, definitely. I like to go back to the beginning. So Dr. Montessori herself, she was working, she was one of the first women, if not the first, to be a qualified doctor in Italy. And then she actually was starting to move into pedagogy, and she was invited to set up a school for what they called delinquent or defective children in the slums of Italy. And I always find that interesting because these days Montessori schools can be privately run and these kind of things. And actually the origins were really in a very poor area of Italy. And anyway, instead of coming with a preconceived idea of what this education was going to look like, she used her observation skills that she developed as a doctor. So basically, she'd try out different materials with the children, and she'd see what worked, and she'd keep those things, and the things that didn't work, she'd replace. So she noticed that the furniture was too big for the kids, so she made child-sized furniture. And now if you walk into any preschool, you'll see child-sized furniture. And Dr. Montessori was really one of the first to do that. She noticed that the children liked helping her take care of the environment with brooms and sweeping and watering the plants. And so she also got little child-sized materials so that they could have more success with those kind of things. And then one of my favorite things that happened was there was an inspector coming to see what she was doing, but she wasn't available. And so the children managed to get the key, open up the classroom, got the materials out of the cupboard, showed the inspector how all the materials worked, and then put them back in the cupboard. And that was the end of the inspection. And so Dr. Montessori took his information. He said, well, if the kids can use these materials when I'm not in the classroom, why don't I lay them out on shelves? And now that's something you'll see if you Google Montessori classroom, you'll see all the materials laid out on shelves for children to work through themselves. So I love that. But one of the biggest differences about the Montessori approach is that instead of the teacher standing at the front of the classroom, like I have all this information and I'm going to give it to you. So I've got a very simple diagram here, which has the adult at the top. Oops, and I'm filling the child. I'm just pushing it down this way. There's actually no arrow going at all here. Shouldn't have put it there. So that's the adult just saying, okay, I'm staying at the front of the classroom. I'm going to give you all the information. And in the Montessori approach, you have more like a triangle. This is a child, the environment, and the adult. Oh, and the adult. It's all reversed. And what you can see is a very dynamic relationship. You've got arrows going in both directions. So the adult prepares the environment. So before the children even arrive, a lot of our work's done. We're looking at what materials will meet the children's needs, how we can present them beautifully, attractively, and so that they're engaging. And then when the child comes in, they interact with the environment. This is quite hard to do on a screen, this one. And then the adult's observing, and when they need to assist the child or step in to give them a lesson, then, well, I should do it like this, then I can see. And there's a dynamic relationship here as well. And then as the adult, that's me in the environment. I'm always constantly observing and seeing what I need to adjust. And for example, there was one time when I'd set up a hammering activity, and then next to it was a pegging activity where they had to thread pegs on. And the kids kept banging the pegs. And I thought, why is that going on? You know, what's going on there? And then actually I just observed, and I thought, oh, I guess it looks like those pegs might be for hammering. So I just moved the activities and relocated them, and then there was no more problem. So sometimes we cause the chaos by the way or the confusion by the way we set up the environment. So
yes, and I think you bring up a very good point. It is that this notion that, you know, it's not the adult just giving information, but it's really this whole idea of scientific observation, which is where Montessori got a lot of her knowledge, is observing the children. So we observe what the environment, you know, might need to entice the children to do great work. And this can also be done at home. I mean, I really encourage parents to constantly be taking a step back and observing what the children are getting into and what intrigues them, what interests them, so that we can really simply tweak the environment and make small adaptations so that they can really have these experiences that is going to help them master a skill that they are feeling the need to learn and improve on. So that observation is really a big key to Montessori education and to Montessori in the home.
Yeah, and I think what people get confused about is they're like, well, if there's 30 kids and there's no teacher standing at the front of the classroom, isn't that just absolute chaos? And what they don't realize is the 3-year age gap of the children. So there's 3 to 6-year-olds or 6 to 9-year-olds or 9 to 12-year-olds in one class. And that mixed age group really helps because you have the older children who already know how, like say at the beginning of the school year, they already know how the classroom works. They can get on and start their work. They're modeling for the younger children, and the younger children are learning from watching the older ones. So that really helps. It takes the pressure off. The teacher is just there then to observe and to give lessons when a child needs a new lesson. And the teacher always knows where a child's up to because they can't move on to the next material until they've mastered the last one. So you don't need testing to then see where the kids are up to. Here in Amsterdam, they do have to do testing at the Montessori schools, but they tend to try and give them just a worksheet to work through, and they never really give them the results and things like that. But do they have to do Montessori testing in the schools in America?
Not that I know of. I mean, maybe in the elementary classes, I would think so, especially if some children are wanting to go into more traditional schooling. And then we do have some tests when we're applying for university and such. So I know that some of the charter school, what we call charter schools, which are under the public system, they do need to test to be able to, you know, stay up to standards of whatever state they're in. But I think it's just like what you were describing, is they have it as just another activity and not this pressure and this stress that I think in the more traditional schools we put on this, you know, testing that we have. But I just want to go back to one point that you made about the multi-age classroom too, which to me is a very important aspect of Montessori education in the school setting, because it's really set up for that social interaction and really similar to a family where there's older siblings and younger siblings. And having been witness to, you know, having worked in a classroom with 3 to 6-year-olds, it is just beautiful to see that interaction and how the older children do really cherish their role as of the older child, but how it really helps them really understand what they've been learning, because they have to, you know, show it to a younger child. And it's just, they get these, you know, really beautiful aha moments of just understanding, some of the concepts that they've been working on the years before. So it really is beautiful, and that
Well,
to
you know
me,
yourself that if you explain something to someone else, you have to understand it very well before, and so it consolidates your learning. It's definitely, yeah, it's beautiful.
it is, and that to me is always when families are looking for Montessori schools. That to me is always a red flag if the school does not have a mixed age group. It's to me there's a part of the theory or the philosophy that they're not understanding or respecting. And so to know that and to be aware of that when you are looking for Montessori schools, and that if you do put your child in the Montessori school, commit to being there for 3 years, especially for the primary, what we call the casa, or the primary, which is that 2.5, 3-year-old to 6-year-old, because the environment is really set up for them to have 3 years to get all of the concepts and to be able to go and do all of the activities. And they really need that time to really have it all sink in. So that would be my little word of advice if you are looking for an actual school.
And what people might not know is that Montessori, the name Montessori, was never copyrighted. So people can call themselves a Montessori school, and it's a Montessori inspired school, or they might have some Montessori materials, or they might not have any Montessori materials. So yeah, I definitely have a video which I could link to in the show notes, 10 things to look for in a Montessori school. And I think you've got a similar post, so I'll definitely add that.
Oh, good. So anything, I know that you wanted to also share with our viewers kind of some key words that we use when we talk about Montessori. One of them being the absorbent mind. Is there, do you want to speak to that? And I have some things as well.
Yeah, sure. So the absorbent mind is from 0 to 6 years old, and that's when children pick things up just like a sponge. So what's very interesting, though, is a sponge can also pick up dirty water just as it can pick up clean water. So I like to say that be very conscious of what you're putting into the environment and the language that you use, because that is the thing that your child will be absorbing. If you kick your chair in, then your child will see, oh, we kick chairs in. If you if you use beautiful language like, oh wow, look at this beautiful pink light lily over here, and you give real names, or the dog, look, it's a golden retriever, it's wagging its tail, and you give rich language, then your child will also absorb that. So I think that they're just like sponges. In the 0 to 3 age group, it's an unconscious absorbent mind. You never have to sit down and give them a grammar lesson, but gradually they start to piece the parts of a sentence together, and then they're making full sentences. And then from 3 to 6, it's a conscious absorbent mind. And then all of a sudden they're looking around their environment and wanting to understand all the things that they took in that first half of the plane. So yeah, the absorbent mind is really fun to see in action. You see it probably, I'm sure, if you have a child under your roof right now.
Yes.
Taking everything in.
And somebody was asking more specifically, what is the kind of the neuroscientific explanation? And I'm not a doctor or anything, but from the Montessori theory and such, it's really this understanding that we are born with 100 billion neurons just waiting to make connection. And during this period of the absorbent mind, as Simone said, those first 6 years where it's the most prevalent, is really those neurons are making those connections. And it's really that netting is being formed, so that what we call gray matter is really becoming active, and really, everything is connecting. And that is why, the environment is so important, to really expose them to as much real life experiences, to bring them outside, to bring them to the market, to go and walks in nature, to speak to them in our, the most perfect, beautiful language. Because as Simone says, they're absorbing both the good and the bad, and they're really absorbing not only language and how to do things, but really our cultural norms, our emotions, our reactions, everything. They're really a very intuitive, wise sponge. You know, they're taking in images and relationship prejudices, like I said, cultural norms, everything. They're really in this, you know, amazing brain formation. So that's really when she refers to the absorbent mind, what it means. And before Montessori, we often thought that the child was an empty vessel that we needed to fill with information. And since her teachings and observation, and now being proven with all of the brain scans and so forth, is that we realize how powerful and how advanced that newborn's brain is to be able to create their psychic life. So fascinating to me.
I think it's great. Yeah, lovely.
Yeah. Yes. So another,
just quickly being cheeky as well, is that basically the traditional schooling system is saying that children are like empty vessels. So even though before Montessori you said, but actually even today we're still trying to change what people think education really is.
That's definitely. No, definitely. Very true. Very true. Another thing that, you know, the definition that often comes up when we talk about Montessori is the notion of sensitive periods. Can you talk a little bit about that, Simone?
Yeah, I think sensitive periods is an important one to cover because it's why the Montessori approach works. Because a parent might be, well, like, if I don't give them maths, then why will they be attracted to maths? Or if I don't give them a book to read, how are they going to learn to read? You know, so I mean, it's about setting up the environment and then letting the child take the lead on all of these things. And the sensitive periods is that we have a program, like our own timeline that's already, you know, predefined almost, that children will develop in a sequence, but they have little moments, these sensitive periods where something goes in very easily. So it might be for, say, a child under 3, there's sensitive period for language. So they're just so busy with language and picking up everything, the way we speak, the way books that we read, conversations, how you have a conversation, all of these kind of things. You have a sensitive period for movement. And that's why it's so important to make time for movement, to actually place a baby on the ground, not just always being in a carrier or in a baby seat or in a car seat, but really making time for movement, because these sensitive periods are so important. And then as you move into 4 or 5, you might have some sensitive period for reading and for writing. And everyone's going to have their sensitive period at a different moment in time. And that's why when you see signs, like when a child might point to some signs as they're walking down the street and say, "Mummy, what does this say?" Then you're realizing, this is starting to awaken. So then I'm going to provide more of it. And people say, how do I apply it at home? It's like, well, if your child's busy posting, why don't you provide more posting activities? And they're like, but what about all the other things they could be learning? It's just like, they will get to it, but if they're in a sensitive period for you, you can feed it. And then people say, well, what if I miss the sensitive period? Like, what if I didn't see it? And it's like, it doesn't matter. It will still happen. But it's a bit like me learning Dutch at 40. It's really hard to get it in there. It takes a lot more effort. Where when you actually meet that need in the sensitive period moment, then it goes in so naturally and so quickly.
Yes. And to add to that, it's really that notion that a sensitive period is really a moment in time when the child's brain can learn things without any effort. They're just like that. It's also called a window of opportunity. So it's really this time where they're absorbing it passionately, like it's just stronger than them, where they're just wanting to figure something out. So, you know, there is that that we see it in the young child, the sensitive period for movement, where they're just perpetual motion, and it's really important to let them satisfy that need, because they are trying to figure something out, and they are doing this very, you know, unconsciously and just from a need that is being called to them. Also, you know, sensitive period, like you mentioned about, you know, being interested in the symbols of our written language. that is just an interest of theirs. There's an inner guide that is letting them know this is something I need to figure out. I see it everywhere. What is going on, and it's really important when you see a child's interest to really feed that curiosity, to really engage them into it, and not be afraid that they're so focused on only one thing. Maybe an older child. I remember for me in the classroom when I was first starting out, I remember being a little taken aback by a boy who was just fascinated with the sequence of numbers, and he would spend hours counting, what we call the skip chain, where you're counting by twos or fives or sevens, and he would write it down, and he would spend mornings after mornings after mornings doing this. And I did at one point have an air of concern, like, should I be trying to get him to do something else? And I asked my mentor at the time, is this okay? And of course it's okay, because this is a sensitive period for him right now, and once he has satisfied that need, he will move on. So it's really to be in trusting that the inner guide knows what they're doing, and to really let them go through the motion of soaking all this information in with such ease. Because if we stop it or wait or what, it will everything will still be learned, but maybe with a little bit more effort than it is when we can really seize the sensitive period for whatever they're wanting to learn.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I also think a really important thing to talk about when I introduce Montessori always is the concrete materials that we use, that we're working with hands, rather than telling the child, we're like, I don't know, let's find out together. And we're always providing materials that they work with their hands. I love the math material, for example, in a Montessori classroom, because it's so concrete. It's not writing on the board, oh, this is 1 and this is 2. They're really holding like a little bead, and this is 1, and then there's a chain of them, that's 10, and then there's 10 chains to make 100, and then 10 of them laid on top of each other, there's 1,000. So very visually you can see what's 1, what's 10, what's 100, and 1,000. And then you work with numbers in so many different ways. You line them, making number chains, number rolls, working with them in such concrete ways. The materials that we have in the younger age groups are always, there's something that the child has to hold on to. I'm never sitting there filling them with information. So I love that too. I think it's so important.
It's funny, you're making me miss being in the actual classroom and working with the material, because the Montessori material, at least the environment that I was in, the 3 to 6, is just so beautiful. And it is, this concrete of really the child really figuring it out by manipulating it, by counting, by putting, things in their hands, which are, for me, a lot of what we can also do at home. When parents tell me, oh, but my child knows how to count from, 1 to 10. That can be great, but counting is sometimes just a rote memory of just, a sequence of number, but they're not grasping the idea of quantity. So, for example, in the classroom we have this material called the spindle box, where we are actually holding the number of spindles in our hands. So we're really feeling what it is to have 1 spindle or 8 spindles. It's very different. And so at home, you can do it with, having a child set the table, for example. Oh, can you put, 5 forks in your hands? Or, let's pick up 3 sticks, or just really letting them manipulate things so that they can really create this understanding of the symbol and the quantity together. So, yeah. Beautiful.
Can we get on to some of the questions that have been sent in, maybe?
Sure, unless you want to just touch on the 4 planes of development, which is also another term that we use in Montessori, or do you want to move on?
I'm happy to do a quick intro to 4 planes. I find the 4 planes fascinating. And basically, Maria Montessori recognized that there were 4 planes of development, planes being PLANES. And it basically from 0 to 6, you have similarities. From 6 to 12, you have similarities. From the age of 12 to 18, and then from 18 to 24. And I find that super interesting that she recognized that childhood goes to 24. And now brain research shows that our prefrontal cortex, which is all of the decision making and making good decisions, still is developing into your early 20s. So she was right that we're still a child until our mid-20s. So from 0 to 6, you have a huge change. You go from a baby that's lying prone on their back to a child that can walk, talk. It's a huge explosion. And you have a similar explosion in teenage years from 12 to 18. So you have parallel development going there. You have these big body changes and things like that. From 6 to 12, you have a much more stable period. Where the child is looking at gray areas, a bit like the black and white, like, oh, so we go to church and they go to synagogue, and what's that about? Those kind of questions start coming up. And then from 18 to 24, the child often goes into service. But I just really like these 4 planes because you see in the first half of the plane, from like say 0 to 3, that's the absorbing everything, and then the crystallization in the second half of the plane. And I really found that from 0 to 6 is very volatile. 6 to 12 gets a little bit like calmer. 12 to 18, very volatile again, huge changes going on for the child. And then again, 18 to 24 is similar to that 6 to 12 age group where it's a little bit more stable.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is when we know that, it's also a much easier to have a roadmap to know what to kind of expect in our children. And, you know, a child who was very orderly at one point suddenly, you know, couldn't care less about any order or showering or anything. It's normal. It's perfectly normal. It's fine. You know, we don't need to push it. So I think that when we have a better understanding of the broader picture, and that it's all related to brain development, I think makes the parenting journey a lot easier. It's not always, you know, without anxieties, because we're still, you know, wanting to do it well. But if we have those notions, I think it does help a lot. So that's thank you for all of that, Simone. And I just have a few questions that were sent in, and also if anybody is online, I'm keeping an eye on the chat. So if you have any other questions, please do ask them. So one was, so we talked about the absorbent mind. So there was one that I find very interesting, and it is, how would you sensitively respond towards a toddler's interest, so here is a sensitive period, in literacy at a time when developmental scientists, more than ever before, emphasis on the play-based approach and suggested delay academics, including literacy, until at least age 7. And this comes to us from Sandarunu in Germany. And Simone, if you want to touch on that, I know I have some suggestions as well.
Yeah, definitely. I really like this question because it goes back to one of the tenets of Montessori, which is follow the child. If your child's showing interest in read, rather than saying, oh, that's B, we say, oh, that's B, that's the sound, because basically you're then giving them the tool to be able to decipher any and decode any word that they come across. So they'll be able to spell out k, a, t, and they'll be able to eventually then synthesize those back together. So I always just say, have the things available. I don't have Montessori materials with letters and things, but have books always available, and conversation is a very important part of language as well, and vocabulary building by naming everything that's sitting near you and what in your daily life is really important. But yeah, to say to a child, no, you can't learn to read, it would be crazy. And my daughter, in fact, was in a Montessori classroom, and she was obviously observing very closely what all the older kids were doing, and she taught herself to read. You're not going to say, oh, Emma, you're not allowed to read now. So we don't even know how she did it, really. It was just that she picked it up like a sponge. And so inputs, outputs. So sensitively, I would not push it, but I would just follow their interest in it.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, it's also in how we understand this notion of, academic and play-based. To me, if a child is interested in, figuring out what the symbols of our written language is, that is play. That is what they're interested in. That is what their curiosity. So it's really about just not having this, category so much of like, oh no, that's academic, you would be playing to, stop sign on the street says, and all of that is play for them. We often talk in the Montessori classroom about work. We call it work, and but work it's the child's play. I mean, it's just the way that they're learning. So it's really, I guess that definition of understanding it. So yes, I would encourage you, if your child is showing signs of interest in the written language, to follow their lead, because I have seen children be interested as young as 3 and being able to decipher language and be reading by the age of 4, and it would be a pity to say, like Simone says, to, oh no, wait, you're not old enough for that. So it's really about following their lead.
A lot of parents actually are also surprised when we have, say, scissors in the classroom and a 16-month-old goes over to them and they say, shouldn't we say, don't touch them, you're not ready? And we say, oh, well, I just show them how we take it to the table and that we sit down with the scissors and we open and close them. And then often they lose interest and walk away. I don't have to say no. So it's kind of like we just keep offering it and then they walk away. And then the day that they sit down, they really open and close the scissors. It's the same as how they might approach reading or any of those other things as well. And also for those people who don't know anything about reading in the Montessori approach, they actually begin first with writing and then with reading, because writing, you're able to sound out those sounds. So you play I Spy, for example. That's about the only activity I would do at home to encourage reading, which is like, I spy with my little eyes something beginning with tr. And it might be traffic light or it might be truck and these kind of things. And then they'll be able to, would you like to see what tr looks like? And then in a classroom, they'd show them how the t looks, and they're saying it and they're hearing it and they're feeling it. And then they have the movable alphabet where they might then want to go and spell it out, so then they can take them over. But we never ask the child to read it back, because that's a whole other step. To sound out truck and then put them together to say truck, it's a second stage. So we write before we read.
Okay. Yes. And when Simone says write, it's not actually with a writing utensil. It's with letters that are isolated, and we just put them together and make sounds. But yes, writing before reading. There is another question that comes from us from Slovakia, Katka, who actually, I'm sorry, where is it? It was something about the pink tower, but I'm not seeing it right now. Oh, yes. But for instance, when I see the pink tower, could you explain better to us that Montessori material teaches only one concept? And because, for instance, when I see the pink tower, which is a very kind of a symbol of Montessori education, pink tower is a sensorial material. Does it not teach more concepts? And so, so to answer that, I mean, I'd like to just mention that the one concept that the pink tower teaches is dimension. And so, yes, dimension is made of different things, but here we are isolating just the dimension, because it's every single cube is pink. And it's about, holding it first, with just this little small cube, and then the next cube, the bottom cube is going to be big, and we're going to need 2 hands. So we're just letting them experience dimension. So, and the question was more about, how we isolate the concept that we want the child to master, and this is really seen really well in Montessori material, where we're not going to have a multitude of different senses in one material. So for example, here, the pink tower, everything is exactly the same. The texture is the same. The color is the same. The only thing that changes is dimension. The same thing with maybe touch boards, for example. It's going to be a touch board. It looks exactly the same. The only thing that's going to be different is the texture that we feel to the finger. And this is really very different than a lot of the toys that we see, out in stores, where there's just so much stimulation, where there's going to be a puzzle, where there's going to be different shapes and different colors, and it might even make sounds and all of that. And that is really not helping the child focus on, what we want them to acquire. So hope that answers your question. Simone, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think also that a lot of the Montessori materials, they do just have this one thing. So rather than having a baby toy that has something that flashes here, and this one's for crinkling, and this is here, we just have one thing. This is just a posting toy, and you post it. But what it is with a lot of materials is indirect preparation for. So you might have other concepts that will be introduced in the thing that they'll come back to later, but actually, there's one principle that they're working on, and then you might have indirect preparation for writing or reading, just like a ball tracker is already crossing the midline, because that's how you're going to read, things like that.
Yeah. So I have another question from Katka also, and this is about, and this is very interesting, I like this, it's about play with food. I see many pictures on the internet for sensory play with food. Is it really Montessori? Simone?
No.
No, not at all.
I think there's a lot of sensory materials that are available, and like we've talked about earlier, it might just be even going to the market and hearing the sounds around us and being involved in nature, and there's so many things to do with touch that are sensory, and there's many materials. The way that we choose our materials is based on their beauty and how they feel and how they look and how they smell, and so we're really working with all of the senses all the time. But I think something like these sensory bins would be an addition to, and sometimes they can be useful for therapy, or just for play, whatever, but don't call them Montessori, because I don't think they are. I must admit that at the moment we're doing some stamping with apples, and I'm kind of a bit worried that the children are going to start painting their apples at home, because we're using the apple instead of as eating to use it for printing. But I think I'm just making an exception and explaining as well to the child, do we normally paint on food? No, so I'm also
Yeah, no, and it's true. So the answer is obvious to me. No, it is not Montessori, and I personally don't see the use of it. I mean, to me, I would rather invite a child into the kitchen to be cooking with me and have that sensory experience as they're manipulating whatever ingredients need to be put into our recipe and such. And as Simone says, there's so much in our world already to experience. I mean, to just go outside and walk in the grass and bare feet and touch the leaves and the sticks and the stones and all of that. That when I see a child in a bin of pasta, I cringe, because to me it's not a respectful use of food, for one, and it's giving the child a very kind of bizarre message of what they can do. So if a child purposefully, because they are exploring, puts their bowl of pasta on their head, that's a different question. That is something that they're exploring. But to choose as an adult to do that, I personally have issues with it. So thank you for that question, because it's true that we see a lot of Montessori sensory activities, which I don't always think that they're should be called that, for sure. So
you're your description also brought to mind like an Italian kitchen, you know, all the sounds and smells and the community around the table. And we should be trying to emulate that, you know, slowing down. And if your child's interested and you don't have a learning tower or a step ladder, then bring it to the table, bring them to the table and chop food and chat. And they can just be pulling letters apart and having all of it.
Yeah. No, very, very true. Very true. And it brings back all sorts of memories when my children were much younger and in the kitchen, and just, you know, we would smell and we would touch and all of that, but it was because it was, you know, what was being made together. I just want to go back to the chat, and I have Haley who's asking us, how can I use the Montessori approach for my 10-month-old? And I know this is kind of your field of expertise, Simone. So do you want to give Haley any suggestions?
Oh, there's lots of ideas. Okay, so let's start with, say, language. And like we said before, they're in the unconscious absorbent mind, but they're still very much like a sponge. So it means that during our daily life, we use nappy changing, for example, as a moment for connection and talking them through what's happening. When we want to change their nappy, instead of just picking them up, we could say, oh, I'm going to lift you now. And you can even wait for them to lift their head and react before you move them. And very gentle. I always think, I love the interview that we did with Junifer, and she talked about how gentle our hands can be when we handle our baby. And it's just showing them a respectful way of how you handle another person. So even if you would have to stop them from hitting you or pushing you, you can just gently use your hands to say, oh, I can't let you hit me, or that kind of thing. But you can be very clear about your limits there too. That's something I want to talk about later, Jeanne-Marie, is the freedom and limits in a Montessori classroom, because people always ask about that as well.
Yes, and I think that's a whole show in itself, because I know that those are questions that come up a lot.
Yeah. Then there's movement, and a child who's 10 months old may be crawling, maybe sitting, it depends, but they definitely need to be on the ground and little objects just a little bit out of their reach so that they're encouraged to move. Looking for materials that just roll very slowly so that they will kind of want to creep after them. You can also have a bar attached to the wall, like a ballet bar, low at their height, and they can practice pulling up on that. And if you put a mirror behind it, we actually had an old bath rail and we drilled it into our kitchen cupboards because they were coming out anyway. And my daughter would stand there for the half an hour while I was cooking, pulling herself up and sitting back down. And she was about 10 months old and she really loved that. But looking at the furniture in your environment and thinking maybe there's an ottoman, the coffee table, shall I clear that off so they can use it for cruising, the couch, all of these kind of things. The types of materials that are interesting around 10 months are often the posting and threading activities. So it might just be that you cut a hole in the top of a shoebox and they're posting a ping pong ball in, and then you take it off and they're discovering it again. It's object permanence. Then you can get more elaborate where a drawer will open and out comes the ball. Or when I say threading, I mean like one of those ring stackers, but take away 5 of the rings and just leave 1, or even have a bangle and they're just trying to get it on top like that. Is very popular around that age. There's also a really nice ball activity that we have in our classroom that has 3 balls on the top, and you can use a hammer to hammer them. But for a 10-month-old, they like to just get their hands and push it down, and that's a nice way, particularly if they haven't got early release of their hand yet, would be nice. So we've talked a little bit about language, a little bit about movement, a bit about materials. Anything else? I mean, that's really like fast. Obviously.
Yeah, no, that's very fast, but yes, it's really, you know, for me, Montessori starts from conception. So there's plenty of different, you know, tools and activities that you can do with children along the way. And 10 month is a beautiful age of discovery. What Simone mentioned, the object permanence is really understanding that an object still exists even though it's out of sight. And so those are toys that really help them, you know, understand that concept and such. So, and again, to me, it's really about observing your child and taking the time to see what they're gravitating towards. What are they, you know, do they, I mean, I remember my daughter, we were traveling and there were 2 baskets on the floor with onions and potatoes or something. And it was just transferring them from one to the other, from one to the other, from one. And it wasn't, you know, something that I had set out, but it was her interest. And so for me, as long as they're not hurting themselves or in any, you know, danger and they're not harming anything, then let them explore, because they're being driven by their own curiosity. And I think it's important to let them explore and take note, see what they're interested in, and then you can, you know, re-engage them with a similar activity later on. So yes.
So, Jeanne-Marie, every time I do an introduction to Montessori in my classroom, the question that comes up is about freedom and limits. It's about, oh, isn't Montessori where the kids are allowed to do whatever they like? Or on the other hand, oh, isn't Montessori super strict and the kids are only allowed to do like this thing with the materials? And so I really like to say, actually, Montessori is somewhere like in the middle. It's saying we're giving you a lot of freedom within some limits, because limits is rules in society. We can't just go straight through a red light. You know, it keeps people safe. That's what limits kind of gives you: safety. It makes you work in a community, and they're there to exist. But if you're so autocratic and there's too many rules, then people will feel very constricted. They'll feel like, I don't have any choice and I just want to get around these rules and I don't want to accommodate. So it's about having just enough rules to keep that together, and then a lot of freedom within those rules as well. But if you have too much freedom, then you get a child that doesn't really look about the consequences of their actions, thinking about other people even, and it's really just, oh, what feels good for me right now, and I'm just going to go along with that. Okay, let's say fair and that kind of thing. So Montessori comes much more back into the middle.
Yeah, and I think that this goes even beyond Montessori. I mean, to me, it's really about just our children. I mean, it's a basic human need that they need to have, you know, the freedom to explore, but they also need the kind of loving boundaries and limits, and that is our role as guides, as teachers, as parents and such, is to let them know that they can explore, but you know, we've got them, like we're there to keep them safe and secure, and that's why a child, you know, especially a toddler, will always look at you with these eyes of, well, I know I can't really do this, but are you going to let me this time? You know, they're always testing us, and it's important to let them know what their limits are, because a child that has no limits is an overwhelmed child, and it's just too much for them to handle. So yes, and the environment also is a big part of those limits in the Montessori environment, because there's so much of the feedback that they get from the environment and the material itself that is really important in setting those limits. So yes, very good point. I think we have time for a few more questions that have come in on the chat. There was one question that was emailed to us also about setting up a Montessori home with 4 children under the age of 5.5. And she says that when I have them help in the kitchen, for example, it becomes overwhelming and chaotic. Any tips to get started?
Okay, so it sounds like she's got a little mini Montessori classroom there. And so if they're just new to the Montessori approach, it might be something that she'd like to build her own confidence with the older ones while the younger ones are napping, for example. It's also about setting up for success. So people say always, oh, I can't believe you bake with the kids in your classroom. It's like, but yes, I also have it all prepared. So with the right amounts of things, I'm not running to the kitchen to quickly get something. I've thought about what I'm going to need. I have everything at the ready. And I also have things to clean up, because I always have cloths to wipe and a dustpan to sweep, because they're going to spill. But it's also half the fun. And also I find baking or something like that very forgiving, you know, so if something's a bit wet, just add a bit more flour and it turns out to be quite good anyway. So you can improvise, it doesn't have to be perfect. And I think also what I like to hear about with the older ones, it can help the younger ones as well. So if one of the babies is getting a bit fussy, the 5.5-year-old could maybe help look after that one. So you're getting this sense of community within a family. Not all the children have to be entertained, but you're just this family unit that's looking out for each other.
Yes, no, perfect. And you know, again, to me, it's also about preparing the environment. So when I encourage always parents to, invite their children in the kitchen if their children are showing interest. But it does take a little bit of preparation on your part, whether you in your mind kind of go through the steps of what's going to be needed to maybe pre-measure things for a younger child, making sure that you have all that you need out at arm's reach, because we just want to be right there present with them and not say, oh, wait a minute, I forgot something, in the pantry, and then catastrophic something is going to happen. So it's really about preparing yourself and the environment before you engage in things. So it does take a little bit more out of us, but it is just so beautiful to be able to engage our children in preparing, communal meals and such. So it gives them a lot of.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
They can also help
go ahead.
people in that part of the meal process as well. And I was just also going to add that in the living area or wherever they're going to put toys or activities, is that when they have mixed age groups, that can become difficult. And so if you have bookshelves, even like the ones like Jeanne-Marie's got behind her, is that the activities for the older ones are up high, out of reach of the younger ones, and the younger ones have access to everything that they're going to, whatever they can touch is going to go in their mouth. So it has to be age appropriate, down low, and whatever they can reach. And then also what's really important with mixed ages is having spaces that the children can go to when they want to be by themselves, because we like being as part of a family, but also usually out of 4 kids, there's probably definitely 1 or 2 that would like some very quiet time and don't want to be interrupted. Particularly if a 4-year-old's building a tower, they don't want the baby to knock it over. So it might be that they can climb up to the kitchen table, or that they can go to their room, or they build a tent with a blanket over the top, and then they stick up a sign that says keep out. And of course the young ones can't read, but they can point to the sign that says, oh, he wants some private time now. And that's all it takes. So I think some of those ideas would at least get her started. But yeah, happy handfuls is what I like to say.
Nice. Wonderful. Let me just see if, yes, let's answer maybe 1 or 2 more questions. My goodness, there is, so we talked about the sensory boxes. A person is asking, does Montessori use sensory boxes that could help to develop speaking skills? So I'm not quite sure what she's referring to, but I think we talked about sensory boxes, like using food, which we said was, Simone and I didn't really think big on it, but there are plenty of activities, to kind of, I'm thinking of the mystery bag, or there's stereognostic bag that we call, where there's objects in the bag that the child is going to feel and be able to, identify and put language. So not sure if that's what you're referring to. Simone, do you have any? Do you understand this?
So I don't know of any sensory boxes that develop language. The only thing that I can think of is that sometimes babies are still...
Yeah, the only ones, the mystery bag, the ones that I'm thinking that are both in the toddler environment and then in the primary one. Oh, I know. There's the question about a 3-year-old who, she's the mom is asking about, I've been waiting 3.5, and I've been waiting for her to get into the sensitive period for order, but I don't see it. So the question really is, what do I do to help her be more organized?
Yeah, I think this goes back to setting up our environment and having a special place for everything. And I'm not sure about the parents, but often we often have to look at ourselves. If we're seeing that there's no child order in our child, then often there's no order in us. I'm not saying anything about this parent, I don't know, but it could be. So it really, when we look at our spaces, sometimes I put down my shoes in the kitchen, and sometimes I put them down by the hallway. And actually when we say, okay, when we come in, we're going to hang up our bag here, and there's a little hook at their height, and here are the shoes, and they go here. And then also encouraging them to make use of those spaces. Oh, our shoes go by the door. And then you can just help them. It's never like saying, how do I make my child put the things away? It's like, how can I help them put things away? It's just this little switch, I think, in the head where the parent we are the boss, but we're guiding them. We're just always giving them assistance to help them. And what skill do they need right now to be able to achieve that? Often there's too many toys as well in a space, and so it's really hard for the kids to pack things away, and it's really hard to be ordered. So I often, even my teenagers, I need to go in once a month and help them clean out their rooms because things have built up and they've brought home things from friends, and all of a sudden there's not a special spot for everything, and that can really help. When you take away a few things and rotate the toys instead of having just a big toy box, you'll see that the kids become also more ordered. And you can use these ideas even in a bathroom so that a child has a hook down low for them to have their own towel. They can reach their toothbrush. Things always go in the same spot. And kids really like order in terms of their routine in the day. So after we have breakfast, then we get dressed, then we do this. And you'll find that that routine can also help structure their day, give you more ease with transitions, and there's some things that I would start to introduce to give more order to them.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it's and you touched upon it, but it's about simplifying and decluttering. I mean, I do a lot of in-home consultations, and clients that I work with virtually. Oftentimes it's just getting rid of, putting away, not necessarily throwing away or giving away, but there's oftentimes just too much, and it can just be overwhelming for a young child to put everything away. So I would really, look at the environment, see how we can really simplify and minimize the amount of toys and activities that are out for a child. At a certain time, and so that there's really also a specific place for each material, and it always goes back, on that low shelf, whether it's in a tray or in a basket, that the child can visually see where things are, and that will definitely help them for sure. Okay, so we have time for just maybe one more question, and this I think is a good one for you, Simone. Anka has a 14-month-old, and she can spend about 20 minutes working with the shoelaces, or his shoelaces, and trying to put them in the shoes hole. How can I further support this interest for a 14-month-old?
Oh, it's really interesting. So they're probably getting into small details. So that fact that a shoelace going into a very small hole, it means that they're interested in that. So I'd think, okay, how can I provide them maybe a coin box with a small slot and they're posting coins in? Or even smaller, how can they transfer this from this bowl to that bowl? Lots of raisins for snacks that they have to pick up with small fingers. It could be even starting to introduce some threading activities that are more complicated, and teaching them how to put their shoes on and off is actually the practical skill behind a shoelace as well. So it's already coming up with a lot of ideas for me, and thinking, oh, I wonder, and I'm just picturing this child busy with their little shoelace and thinking, what else could that kind of show me? But I guess it shows also how they're holding the string in their hand, and other things you could do with the string, like some simple lace.
Right, and there's some beautiful lacing activities with the shoelace, but big wooden beads, and having them practice that as well as an activity. But that's wonderful. Well, I think that we are coming to a close here, and I hope this was helpful for everybody. I know I didn't get to all the questions, but again, I feel so grateful and blessed to have people from Egypt and Amsterdam and Zurich and Slovenia and Austria, and I'm in San Diego, and it's just beautiful. So I'm glad that the Montessori community is really reaching to all corners of the world. So this is wonderful. And
just any questions. Without you guys, there's no live show. So thank you everyone for that.
Yes, and thank you for watching and being here and sharing this. This will be on the YouTube channel, so you can definitely share the replay if this was good information and you want to share it with your community. Please do so. And so to wrap it up, I just wanted to let Simone talk about an event that is happening this week that she is sharing. Simone?
Yeah, so this Wednesday is very exciting because it's my first webinar. It's going to be the 2nd of November for those of you who are watching before then. And a lot of people have emailed me because they're on my emailing list, and they get my invitations to come to workshops, but they can't come to Amsterdam. So I'm putting one of my very popular workshops online, and it's about the how to talk so kids will listen approach. And how I put that into practice. So it's going to be a 2-hour webinar on Wednesday, and I'll put the link for that in the show notes that we'll send through tomorrow with the replay. And Jeanne-Marie, you've also got some excitement coming up this week too.
I do. I just, I know some people that are watching us were part of a summit that I just did where, I interviewed experts from all the parenting fields and such. And from that, I asked questions to the viewers and such, and they've basically asked me for some tools and strategies to create a life and family that we desire, and really being able to parent respectfully using the Montessori philosophy, using some positive discipline tools and such. So I will also be having a free webinar this Thursday, and I will also post the links in the chat box or underneath this video when I have it, because I'm still in the creative process. But I will share that, and anybody who's on my mailing list will also receive all that information. So hope that will also be helpful to everybody watching.
Also, I just wanted to announce one thing, is that next live show will actually be in early December. We're going to combine the November and December calls because we know that the end of December is not going to happen for any of us. So we're going to do a really fun one though, so you want to tune in because it's going to be getting ready for the holiday season, Montessori style. So we're going to talk about rituals in the holiday season, perhaps present ideas, and how to cope with holiday craziness in a Montessori way.
So yes, no Montessori show in November, but we will have a combined November-December show on the first Friday of December, December 2nd. So all of you on our list will be informed, and please join our list so you don't miss it. But yes, the next show will be Friday, December 2nd at the same time.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Jeanne-Marie. It's been lovely speaking to you, and we'll see you in a month and a week.
Yes. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye-bye.